Okay, folks, welcome. Welcome to today's webinar. Hopefully, you're hearing me loud and clear through our StreamYard platform. So yeah, thanks for taking the time out today to join us. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Craig. I lead the delivery team here at COMET. Yeah, this next webinar that we're running is just the latest in a series of webinars that we've been running this year throughout the course of the year. And today's theme, of course, is now based around site-based reporting and case management. Now, as some of you will be aware, at COMET, of course, as a provider of systems, software, methodologies in and around incident management, the importance around incident capture, classification, and how that then manifests itself in the rest of the kind of investigation process, of course, is really important. But nothing that you'll see today is this is not a sales pitch. That is not the purpose of today. There's nothing in here about how we specifically at COMET handle case management necessarily. This is really more to try and give you some useful takeaways, principles. Some of it, a lot of it, perhaps, are things that you're already doing very well, or at least aware of. Some of the areas, of course, might be a little bit new to you and is worth considering. But this really is just based on our own experience, working for many years now in industry, in different parts of the globe, things that we've certainly picked up on when it comes to case management. So the do's, the don'ts, and some things to look out for. So yeah, thanks for joining today, and hopefully you'll find it useful as we run through this particular session. Now, as I mentioned, this is one of a few. We will hopefully be fairly soon as well. We're starting to finalize the details of what that may look like. Great to see we've got some people joining us from existing COMET organizations, some not from COMET, which is fantastic, and hopefully just get the benefit of some of the themes and principles that we talk about. That is the purpose of these webinars. So you can see us there. Here is us talking about the benefits of site-based reporting. We've got 2 more before the end of the year. We're doing a little bit in and around ED&I and culture within teams. And then finally, we are going to introduce our root cause scoundrels, who are Pete and Roy, and they'll talk to us a bit about both proactive and reactive root cause learning. So those 2 are coming up, so look out for them. And again, you may well find them useful for some learning's sake. But yeah, today we're going to focus in there and home in on that really important piece around how we capture not just incidents and events, but importantly, things like near misses, observations, conditions, all of the important things that we know have the potential or might have the potential to escalate into something more significant. And so we'll talk about some of the models around that and some of the principles around how we can identify things that might have more potential to cause us harm, and things that have actually definitely caused us harm. Of course, these are things we may well want to go and do a little bit more with, compared to perhaps more straightforward observations that really just relate to a sound reporting culture. So we'll try to explore all of these things in the next kind of 40 minutes or so. You'll notice on the right-hand side as well, there is a comment bar or section. Feel free to pop in some comments or indeed questions as we go along. Challenge anything that we say as well. That's fine. We like a bit of a challenge. I'll certainly pick up on those, if not in live time, certainly at the end of today's session as well. So just some high-level objectives that we'll try and achieve on today's session. Why reporting matters, of course, really important. So we'll talk a bit about different ways in which we report, things that we should be reporting. So we'll take a look at that. What to avoid. So again, some good practice out there, probably some bad practice, things that might not help the process. So we'll take a look at that as well. And actually, importantly, but from a kind of management and leadership perspective, do we help or hinder? So what are some of the things that we set up within the organization that help the process of reporting? What are perhaps some of the things that are inadvertently not helping the process? And again, we'll explore some of that, and we'll go into some detail in and around that. But that's just kind of some themes that we'll try and cover during today's session. If anyone finds this really useful and actually wants more information, of course, reach out to us. My contact details will be on the closing slide later on. And if anyone really wants any of the material we presented today, then again, reach out and I'm sure we can have a chat about that as well. Right. Well, why does it matter? Beyond the obvious things, I guess there are a number of reasons as to why we classified it today as site-based reporting and why that's so important. And again, I'm sure as professionals, you will all have your own ideas on that, and perhaps have even got some of course, better suggestions and reasons, practical reasons than we have here. But I suppose trying to capture a broad spectrum of reasons beyond the obvious, which is try and capture things before they worsen, or indeed to capture that event so we can go and investigate it and learn from it. That's the very obvious reason why we report things. There are perhaps some other kind of broader themes as well. So, we like to think, of course, that if you're operating within your organizations, within your sites, on your assets, if you're operating a really proactive approach to reporting, if you have a reporting system that's accessible, that's easy to use, that allows that easy flow of communication from what's happened, whether that's a digital tool or whether it's a paper-based tool, largely maybe doesn't really matter, but we'll talk about that in due course as well. But we like to think that would really encourage a proactive culture around reporting, and that's really important. It's important that people feel empowered to report. It's important that people feel as though they can report, no matter how seemingly insignificant that might be, that report or that incident or that scenario. Then it's really important that people do feel like it's important that they do report it. All right, and again, we'll talk a little bit about the numbers game later too, which is always an interesting talking point when it comes to reporting. Naturally, we want to identify hazards and dangerous situations and conditions before they result in an actual event or an incident and cause us harm. Harm might be, of course, injury or an accident, but harm might also be, damage to pieces of equipment. It might be reputational damage or harm, environmental, security. Lots and lots of different ways in which we would describe harm, but hazard identification in a broader context naturally is kind of what we're looking to be proactive around and try and prevent things from escalating. Naturally, if we're good at picking up on the kind of day-to-day, so to speak, lower level of things that are happening or going on out there, then at least we give ourselves a fighting chance of preventing the kind of things from escalating or worsening. So again, that's an important aspect of it. For those of you that know us well at COMET, we do talk a lot about the power of data and what that can mean for you all as I suppose, learning organizations. And data is a very important currency these days, both from a BI and an AI perspective. And again, the better that we are, certainly at a site level, at an organizational level, at reporting, at the detail within those reports as well. So when you're asking people to report, what are you asking for? Is it basic information? Is it a little bit more detail? If you have a report that requires escalation, do you go back and establish more details on that? So it's worthwhile thinking about the quality of information you receive during a report, not just the basics, perhaps. Because again, ultimately, the purpose of a report is if we need to act upon it, we can do that quickly, efficiently, prevent escalation, learn from it, be proactive with those kind of shared learnings. So again, that's essentially data-driven decision making, which of course is really important. So again, think about in your current reporting system, what types of information are we asking for? Do we have the right fields? Do we have the right categories? Do we have the right mechanism of which to capture the right details, and we're not actually omitting something inadvertently? So have a think about that as well. And a little bit about what I spoke about initially here actually is around about accountability as well. We want people to feel that they are responsible for reporting. Again, that does come back to culture. We don't want this, idea that, well, somebody else will do it. Walking to the job site and we walk past a dangerous situation or a kind of hazardous condition. Let's not just, assume that somebody else is going to do it. Let's actually take that responsibility ourselves. And if that means that we've received 3 reports for the same thing, then I'd rather that than receiving no reports for the same thing or that particular issue. So let's make sure that people feel, responsible and accountable for looking after their work, colleagues and themselves and their working environment. And if we all have that approach, then we're going to be pretty good at capturing this stuff, I think. And that hopefully drives transparency at different levels. And we'll talk a little bit about that communication cycle. And again, what management can do to make sure that this is a really popular, but a really positive experience for those who do report, regardless of what that report actually is. So yeah, culture, hazard identification, the power of data, and of course, driving accountability and transparency. These are all, broader reasons perhaps as to why it's important that we do this and do it well, as I said, just beyond the obvious things. So hopefully one or two things even within that's worthwhile thinking about. And again, these are things that we see in, being done well in some cases, not being done well in other cases. I guess that's the benefit of an organization like ourselves, because we are interacting regularly with different organizations of different shapes and sizes, within different industries, within different geographical locations, different economies, all the time. We do have that, we do get that insights, and we see a lot of really, really good things, but sometimes we see some things that perhaps not so good. And this is just a chance for us to kind of share some of those learnings as well. So yeah, there you go. Typical report types. Then again, language might be a little bit different, and of course you might align with this, or you might have a slightly different approach. And again, that's absolutely fine. Certainly in our world, and in the systems that we provide, and the processes that we provide for reporting, we do talk about three specific types or categories: incidents, near misses, and observations. And of course, you can classify them in different ways as well. But typically, so you're going to have events, that have actually caused injury, loss, damage. So we have an actual outcome here. Near misses, of course, events where the actual impact was perhaps avoided, but the potential existed. So, hypos, for example. Again, these are a form of an incident that will often still require to be progressed and investigated, and it's almost an opportunity to learn and be proactive around that before that hypo escalates into an actual event with consequence, of course. And of course, observations. So probably quite a common one, actually. And maybe when you look at your reporting data, I would expect to see quite a lot of observations, probably outweighing the near misses and the incidents. A little bit like the kind of bird triangle. We kind of got quite a lot at the bottom, and then we kind of narrow our way to the top. So again, identifying unsafe acts and conditions before they result in any of the above. So before they even result in something that's going to cause us issue, has the potential to more of a latent situation or a latent condition, and again, something that we know isn't right, and we've got to try and put it right or rectify that before it progresses. And again, if I just relate back a little bit to the power of data that you get if you're scraping the right information, you're capturing the right information. Well, what are you doing with that? If you know that you've had in the last 4 weeks, you've had 36 observations across a particular site, and 65% of those observations relate to something similar, or there's a theme throughout those observations. Well, what are you doing about that? Because you might have something systemic going on beneath the surface. So again, not just looking at them on an individual level, but looking at them on more of a macro level. What are you learning? What are the themes? What are the things coming out of that perhaps we want to again use as data driven decision making? But yes, coming back to nuts and bolts, then these are typical categories that we think we ought to be reporting against as a minimum, probably. And as I've said, in the systems that we provide, these are the three sort of high level types that we're encouraging organizations and sites to be reporting against. And hopefully you can align with that as well in terms of what you're seeing. Now, of course, the natural evolution to any of this, when we do capture that initial report and that initial discovery of what's happened. And apologies, I did mention there's not too much COMET stuff in this presentation, but there is some screenshots as we go through, and there's an image from our classification tool. But it is important as well that we classify correctly. Okay. Now, again, every organization will be a little bit different here, but what do we mean by classification? Well, we take a report, we take a finding that's been reported through whatever mechanism you're using. And at some point, by somebody who's trained and qualified and experienced enough to do so, we've got to look at the circumstances of that report. We've got to look at the characteristics of it and ultimately classify, okay, well, actually, is this a near miss with high potential? Actually, no, this was actually an incident. We've got to up rev that because there's more to this. Or is it an observation and that's rightly classified? Because remember, classification will ultimately drive whatever the outcome is or whatever the next step is going to be. So classify correctly and make sure you're looking at the characteristics of that report properly. That will then lead the next steps correctly. And of course, in the cases of most near misses and certainly all incidents, you're probably investigating those. So you're taking that another step or two forward as well. You're not just capturing it, but you're actually investigating it. So again, think about how well you classify. Do you have a mechanism? Do you have a scoring system for that? Or is it just people looking at that and making a decision? So how sophisticated is your approach to that? Again, improve data accuracy, trends, and early triggers. I've really already touched on that a little bit, but again, take a look at the data that's coming through with these reports. Again, is your classification accurate? So again, very, very quickly, you can begin to trend against your low level, your medium level, your high level reports that are coming through. Again, is there a trend or a pattern in the timings of when certain reports come through? So is there a uniqueness or something specific about that, or is it quite random? But again, data will tell you that. You just got to interpret it, of course. So ultimately, getting that correct classification. Apologies, I think my face is obscuring some of that. But getting that correct classification ultimately determines the action and the overall outcome. So that initial report is really important, but that middle step of what you do with that information, how you classify it, that is what will ultimately lead to the next steps in the process here. Now, again, if you buy into our philosophy with incident management, it's not just about incident management, it's about incident reduction. And that's a really important point to make. We want to work with organizations, and we try and actively work with organizations who are looking to reduce their incidents, not just have a mechanism of capturing them and managing them, but actually going on a journey to reduce them. That's what we try and do here at COMET. And so, of course, the classification plays a really important role in that, because if we misclassify, particularly if we misclassify and we underestimate something, therefore something falls through the cracks and does not then get reviewed, actioned, investigated properly, then that's a real missing opportunity. That's a real missed opportunity there. We'll talk a little bit about SIF and PSIF shortly as well. But that's a real missing opportunity in terms of the characteristics of something that really ought to have been looked at in more detail, and that then may well skewer, as I've said, our opportunity for improvements. So think about how you classify, and think about how sophisticated your approach is to that as well. So yes, there are of course different ways, methods, I suppose, tools of which we can report. Again, looking at some different examples we've seen them all naturally, and if we go back to basics here, and again, absolutely nothing wrong with this. If it's a well-oiled machine and it's an accessible way of going about it, then fantastic, and people are familiar with it. Paper-based reporting systems, observation cards, observation reports, whatever. These things can still be very, very effective, even in today's day and age of technology advances and things. Paper-based reporting, it's not going to fail you necessarily, and as long as you're, again, efficient with how you're tracking all that data, and you have a way of doing that and capturing the reports and progressing them and escalating them appropriately, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And again, I'm sure we'll continue to see paper-based reporting systems through SharePoint systems and so on for many years to come. Naturally, of course, again, at COMET being we like to think a relatively progressive organization when it comes to some of this stuff, we do advocate for moving into kind of more digital space. It just makes life easier when it comes to how you can at scale learn from these things, capture these things, trend these things. Much easier to make changes and improvements to a digital system than it is to a paper-based system, believe it or not, through version control, etc. So really important to think about that as well. And there's lots and lots of different mechanisms out there now as well. As I said, this is not a COMET sales pitch, but there's lots and lots of mechanisms out there now for doing this. There's applications, there's online submission forms, QR code systems with QR codes posted around the place. There's progressive web apps available as well that do all of these things. So again, if you're an organization, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, yeah, well, we are paper-based and that's okay, but we want to make that next step forward, then just go and have a look at what's out there, because there are lots and lots of really useful tools as well. And if you're particularly interested, then come and speak to us at COMET, of course. But beyond that, it's really important that you think about how you're doing this within your organisations. Verbal reports as well, up the chain, that's absolutely fine. And again, often that will be the case. We see that quite a lot actually within manufacturing facilities, where it's not necessarily the expectation or responsibility within floor workers that they have to go onto a system or fill out a card because time is precious, but verbally reporting that up the tree to then a supervisor, and that supervisor then goes and makes that official report. Again, that's fine. We see that quite a lot, and even anonymous submissions. And again, if this was a training course, I'd be asking for your views on that, and feel free to pop some information in the chat. But what's your thoughts on anonymous submissions? Again, does that encourage honesty? If people feel as though it's anonymized and it's not going to come back to them, do you think you would see an upsurge in reports? Would you see an upsurge in honest reporting? Maybe people prefer the idea of being able to report. The flip side to that argument might be that if they know that report isn't going to come back to them, if they're reporting something quite important, is there a chance that they don't put enough information on it and they just do it because they see it as a box ticking exercise, and then you lose important information perhaps? I don't know. Generally, there's an argument to be had for both, but there's probably quite a strong argument for having the option for anonymous reporting to try and generate honesty, but probably only if you think you need to. Again, I think if I come back to one of the very first things I mentioned today was about culture and about reporting culture, and if people feel empowered to do that and they know that that's seen as a positive thing, and there's that continuous communication cycle about what's happening with reports and how that's managed and looked upon, then you'd like to think that anonymous reporting is not needed. But not every organisation is sophisticated or as mature as that, and so perhaps anonymous reporting still has a role to play. Again, these are all things for you to consider. And again, maybe things that you're using anyway within your organizations. It's not for us to say what's absolutely correct or otherwise. That these are some things to think about. So again, think about what you're doing. What tools, what mechanisms have you got right now? Are they as efficient as they could be? If you think they are, fantastic. If not, then go out there and have a look and see what's there. Okay, right then. So it looks like StreamYard has messed my slides up a little bit, but that's all right. So some good practice then. What do we see then in our experience that's some good practice when it comes to how you can enable people to report properly, what you should do with that information, and really how to encourage the sort of continuous element of reporting all the time? Well, first and foremost, make it simple. All right, make it as easy as you can for people to report. If people have got to jump through hoops, if they've got to go and find things, if they've got to wrestle with difficult, complicated forms that's got 101, mandatory fields that they've got to go and populate, that is just going to put people off. Okay, we were hosting an event in the last couple of days, and one of our giveaways at the moment is we're actually offering up a 1-day free investigation root cause analysis masterclass. And the initial form, people had to scan a QR code, and it brought a form up on their phone. And the initial form we had at the start of the day, the start of this session, as the workshop was, it had the basic field, name, company, email, but there was 5 or 6 mandatory fields thereafter. We were asking certain questions about, well, how do you investigate at the moment? What system are you using? What challenge do you have? Blah, blah, blah. And I was watching people doing this, scanning it, filling out the details, and people were getting frustrated after even 2 or 3 fields because they thought, I don't need to do this, And so, we actually went away and changed it in live time and simplified it, and that instantly people were, found it much easier to use. And that's for a free training course for them and their colleagues. So what does that then mean for people at the sharp end who don't want to be bogged down with this? So again, think about how easy and simple it is for people to report. Is it a form? Is it a mobile app? Is it a QR code? Is it an observation card? Yes, we want to capture information from a data perspective, as I've said, but really think about what is it we need to capture versus what is nice to capture. So keep the method simple, keep it accessible is really important as well. So make sure people know where to access it, how to go about it, how to report. Give yourself the best chance of funneling that information inwards, because floor workers at the sharp end a huge, rich source of information about what's really going on all the time. So why would we want to limit the way in which they can communicate these things? Okay, so let's make it as simple as possible. Now, this is where the challenge comes, and I'll talk a bit more about management later, but this is where the challenge comes, is in how we actually respond to reports. I'm not saying every single individual report needs a manager to come down and speak to the person that's reported it and pat them on the back. I'm not quite going that far. But if we don't communicate what we do with reports, if we're not showing how we are evidencing how we progress these things, then is that going to encourage people to keep doing it, or is that going to discourage people to keep doing it? I would suggest it's going to discourage people, because if they think that information is falling on deaf ears, if they think that information is not going any further, why would they be really interested in continuing to report something? So again, this comes back to the kind of culture and how we're encouraging people to do it. But again, how visible, how good are we at actually responding to this stuff? And as I said, not on a case-by-case basis, but even high-level themes, doing monthly summaries on what high-level reports have been or what those numbers look like. And again, taking the time to thank people for going that extra effort. In a past life, in a previous organization that I worked with, a big organization that employed thousands of people, management made a decision that they were going to go on the road, so to speak, and they were going to visit different sites, different offices. And they were going to sit down with the people who worked there, not the managers at those sites, not the leaders, but ground workers. And they were going to seek feedback on how things can be improved at that site. And their objective was to implement at least one of the suggestions. So they didn't want it to be seen as a box ticking exercise. They wanted to genuinely go out there, engage with the workforce, and do something for good and for the better. And they decided that a really effective way of doing that was to go out in person, listen to people, and they would, as a minimum, even if some of the suggestions were pretty not great, and they were maybe scraping the barrel a little bit here and there, they would make a point of implementing at least one suggestion, one recommendation from each site. And that instantly had an impact on morale. People thought that was great, that they were coming down, they were talking to them was one thing, but the fact they would actually go away and 3 months later, the new vending machine would arrive, or the upgraded bit of equipment, or whatever it would be, right? Doesn't matter. It's not the point. The point being that they did something with that, and they were visible on how they did it, and they were proactive in how they did it. And that really raised the interest and the kind of work levels at those sites. And I thought that was a really effective way of doing it. So again, just think about how well do we respond, visualize, and sort of feedback, I guess, the information that's coming through. And again, that sort of ties in really to kind of recognition, I suppose, about proactive reporting. Certainly, if we've identified something that was particularly, significant there, and we've really stopped something before it's escalated, then that's a great opportunity to go and recognize that. I think is really important. But even just more broadly, recognition that we've got a good reporting culture and let's keep it going. That's a really positive space to be in. And of course, just an idea there about how we then reintegrate that learning. So if we have made changes, if we have made improvements, then think about how we kind of reintegrate that into day-to-day working life through briefings, through toolbox talks, through general lessons learned. How are we sharing that information so that others are getting the benefit of it as well? So again, just some kind of good practice points. And as I said, I've got no doubt that you guys have all got better suggestions in this as well. They're all already doing this and more. And if you have, then again, feel free to stick that in the kind of comments for other people to kind of benefit from as well. But hopefully just some food for thought there in terms of what to do. Well, the flip side to that, of course, is we've got the kind of the sort of do's and the don'ts here. Things perhaps to avoid. Complex or time-consuming tools. Yes. Again, if we make it difficult for people, they are not going to want to do it. So let's try and, as I've said, make it as simple as possible. That's a bad one. Ignoring reports is something, right? Or not visibly responding to reports, as I mentioned, is bad enough. People then think they're not being acted upon. But imagine reporting something and then actually getting in trouble for it. That to me, I appreciate a report might lead to an investigation that perhaps there was human error or decision making or bad practice, right? That is the reality. But if people see punishment, discipline, like a negative reaction like that as a consequence of reporting something, and when that report was meant to be done for good, then that's a dangerous place to be. And again, let's not make that a habit. As I've said, there may well be unique cases where it does lead to some kind of performance management outcome, and that's just the nature of the beast. Okay, that's a case specific thing, but let's not make that habitual. And let's, I'd like to think that we wouldn't do that anyway. Kind of ties back in a way to the kind of anonymous reporting piece as well. That type of response, you might expect an anonymous reporting to be more effective there. Lack of user or workforce feedback. So again, if we're not encouraging that, if we're not proactive around wanting people to report, communicate things upwards, sideways, then you're just really losing out, I think, on that opportunity and all of that rich information and data that's going to come out from that. Even if 80-90% of what gets reported ultimately doesn't lead to much, but 10% does, well, that's 10% you've got that you didn't have before. So again, ought to think about that, and again, how we're encouraging that. And really kind of what I've mentioned below, I've touched on already. If we're dismissing reports or not treating them as opportunities or to improve, even if the reality is maybe sometimes they aren't. It's more about how you respond to it, not what you've actually done with it or not. But again, feeding that back down that we appreciate that sort of level of engagement from the workforce, I suppose, is really important to keep that going and to keep that kind of culture of reporting going as well. And I'm sure we could add a few more things to that list here if we had time, but probably some high level things to try and avoid. Now then, so I suppose that sort of allows me to summarize, the management, do we help or hinder? I say we, not we or me, but the kind of, the general view here of kind of management. Do we help or do we kind of hinder? So again, how can we help? Well, let's encourage reporting, without that kind of kickback around blame. So let's avoid that culture. It's the same as investigations. Let's try and get past that now. Again, I'd like to think we're a bit more mature and sophisticated than that now. Acting quickly on information that comes in. So again, really being alert to what's being reported in. Again, that's important anyway from a process perspective and a classification perspective, and to actually react and act upon something that's important. But again, if the organization and the workforce and those that are offering the bulk of reports, if they're seeing that swift response one way or the other, then that's a positive sign, right? And again, how we communicate those learnings as well, that's the responsibility. Is not just taking it as a siloed event, not just assuming it's a one-off, but has this happened before? Could this happen elsewhere? Has this happened elsewhere? Let's be proactive and let's share those learnings. And again, that's another great mechanism to show that we're actually listening to people. We care about what's coming through and we're doing something about it. Those three things is an effective combination, we think. We're going to hinder or put up barriers or blockers here, of course, if we emphasize numbers over quality. I'll come on to that in a moment or two in a little bit more detail, I suppose. But discouraging bad news, so not just discouraging reports, but quite often, we see reports maybe more often than not as negative, or we only expect reports to come through that are things that have happened. But we can also report on things that are positive. I think that's a kind of valuable point. We should also be kind of reporting on things that are positive. But discouraging bad news, downplaying things, kind of burying our head in the sand, so to speak, and not being proactive of how we deal with things. Well, we're really failing the system here if that's the approach. And as I've said numerous times, I think already, the importance of how we follow up on reports and what we actually do with these things is a really important point of how we're going to, get these key messages across and encourage people to continue reporting through whatever mechanism it is that you are using. So again, if you're sitting in that seat and you're looking at that and you're thinking, oh well, yeah, maybe we do a little bit of that, then just think about that. But as I've said, I wanted to talk a little bit about the numbers game here. And again, there's just a bit some imagery from our reporting system, but playing the numbers game, and again, an interesting one. People quite often will have different views and opinions on this, about what they see as important here. Now, the very bottom one for us, quality and quantity. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And it's easy to say, well, yeah, it should be quality over quantity, but sometimes quantity can drive quality, so we have to be careful of that. But if we take the kind of target, let's we have a zero harm objective, and we in our reception, when you come into our headquarters, there's a great big digital clock that tells you that we've gone so many hours, days, years, without an LTI or something. Well, does that then encourage people to report that or discourage people to report that? Who wants to be that individual that breaks the cycle and takes it back to zero, just as some of our shareholders walk in the door? Probably nobody. So again, do having targets like that and playing the numbers game, do they help or hinder the culture around reporting? And again, I know this is probably quite a well-trodden path now, but it's still relevant, right? It's still relevant. We still see now. There's nothing wrong with having high objectives and high standards. Obviously, we want to achieve zero incidents, but how realistic is it? We're not going to mitigate human error anytime soon until we all turn into robots. So then, and knowing the fact that on 91% of occasions, a human error will in some way have led to an incident. So 9 in 10 times human error plays a role when we have an actual incident or an event. Therefore, it's highly unlikely we're going to achieve 12 months, let's say, without an incident, particularly in high-risk industry. So again, let's just be realistic with what we're kind of saying about that. And I suppose that comes back to the kind of numbers game from a perspective of, what types of reports are we looking for? So artificially low numbers can hide real risks. So what we're kind of saying there then is that if we are discouraging reporting without realizing it, okay, and we think that, this is great, we only have a couple of observations coming in a month, in a month cycle, and we're really proactive with it, and we've got a great culture, and we're, these are low-level events, and our risk management is really working. Well, that's fantastic. That's great. That's kind of where we want to try and get to. But how realistic is that? And so if we've got low numbers of reporting, then that is a low opportunity for improvement. That's a low bar that we've kind of set there, really, in terms of that. Because is it realistic? Now the flip side to that argument, of course, is what we personally don't see as good practice, of course, is playing the numbers game where we're looking for on an offshore trip or in a set of shifts in the warehouse or the factory or whatever it is, that we expect X amount of reports, X amount of observations per person to come through the system, with the idea being that within that there'll be some really useful reports that will come through and we can act upon that. And if we weren't encouraging or we weren't setting a KPI against it, then we'd probably never have received that. Maybe, but I think these days, and I take this back to the argument around responsibility and accountability, I think if people know they can report and there's an accessible system for how we do that, and there's a good culture around that, it shouldn't matter what the numbers game is, because it should then be quality over quantity. And I suppose the risk with that numbers game is that you start to skew the data a little bit, because probably what you start to get through, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've got, I don't work at the moment offshore, but I've got friends that do, and I can tell you firsthand some of the absolute nonsense that they've had to put on reporting cards, sitting, on their bunk, waiting for their helicopter back home to come home for a month's time, and their supervisor says, "You've not submitted your 4 cards this trip." And they sit there and they write out 4 nonsensical cards about how they moved a box away from a fire escape, or they repositioned a fire extinguisher or whatever, probably making it up half the time. Is there really quality in that? No. So you have lots and lots of reports coming through, which probably overburdens your system, relies on somebody to go and look at those and classify them, and probably you know, by that becoming such a mundane approach, even if there is something within that that's useful, we probably miss it. Okay, or there's a higher chance that we miss it. So I guess our approach very much is on that. You know, if it's a counting game, fine, but does it really count? Okay, so think about that. If it is a numbers game, if it is a counting game, fine. If that's the approach that you want to take or your organization takes, but does it actually count? What is what you're seeing coming through there actually counting towards your goal of learning and being proactive? And I would leave you with that challenge. So fundamentally, you were looking for quality over quantity here, I think. And if we go about reporting in the right way, with the right culture and the right accountability and transparency, then the numbers element shouldn't really matter. You might see it as a technique to get the quality up, which can happen. I'm not going to deny that. But let's not become over-reliant on simply the numbers alone. Okay, so again, just something to think about there in terms of your own strategies and your own culture in terms of how we go about it. Now, that, of course, takes us on to a really important topic, which is talking CIF or PCIF. Now, for those of you that are perhaps less familiar with what we mean by that, whilst this has been on the go for quite a long time in terms of language and what we're looking for within our reports, it's still something that some organizations struggle with today. And that's the interpretation of the data and the reports and saying, well, which ones had the potential to really hurt us here? So when we talk about a CIF incident or a CIF event, that's serious injury or fatality. So that refers to events that result in actual life-changing events, injuries, something quite serious or very serious, in fact, high severity outcomes that of course will demand a thorough investigation and set of learnings and set of actions. PCIF, potential serious injury and fatality, describes that a near miss or incident that could have or may well have caused a serious or outcome similar to the above, but really due to luck, mitigating circumstances, conditions, circumstantial luck, that didn't happen and it was avoided, but the potential was there. So, of course, identifying those and dealing with those often in the same way. Often a hypo event, for example, we'd be investigating in the same way as an event with actual consequence to try and make sure we learn from it. So again, think about that. How do you look at your reports and your data, and how are you able to understand the characteristics that would mean something had CIF or PCIF potential, let's say, within that? How do you do that at the moment? Are you doing that at the moment? There are clever ways in which that can be done. Looking at the natural language within the reports, looking at the equipment that's been involved, looking at the risk of the job. There are certain well-defined characteristics that will help you determine, of the 100 near miss or observation reports that came through your system in the last 3 months, there may only be a very, very small percentage of those that actually could have escalated that to the next level of incident, those kind of CIF or PCIF type of events or circumstances. So how are you able to look at those characteristics and establish that, so that you're focusing your time on that 10, 20% of pain that's probably going to cause you the bulk of your harm if you don't do something about it, or those events? So that kind of 80-20 rule. So how do you know that you're actually focusing in on the right areas? And again, the kind of CIF, PCIF characteristics is maybe an area that you want to explore a little bit further if you're not doing that already. Quick COMET plug, and apologies, you're captive for the time being. We do have software. We do have very intelligent in-house closed AI service that can latch onto your data with CIF characteristics hunting and can start to tell that information to you. So if you want to chat to us about that, then feel free. But there are ways in which, of course, you can do that makes it automated, not manual. And again, effective reporting systems then help capture those PCIFs before they result in CIFs. That's the kind of goal here. Before they even get to PCIFs, but at PCIF level, how do we stop that from escalating? So what does that mean then to looking at our kind of high-risk trends, looking at our actions that we're putting in place, our controls, etc.? That's going to be really, really important. So again, hopefully some food for thought in that too. So, okay, just some benefits of observations. Then I'm wrapping up soon. You'll be glad to hear. But some benefits within observations: early detection, proactive around behaviours and conditions will spot trends. So before that behaviour, before that condition even results to a near miss, for example, then onto an incident, that's how we can try and be proactive. So looking at those low-level effective reports as well. Encourages worker engagement. They see it in a positive light. They see it being taken well. They see positive actions. And of course, the whole purpose of that is to try and reduce the likelihood of reoccurrence down the line. And absolutely, we're talking here about leading indicators. Naturally, reports, effective reporting is about looking for leading indicators. So what are the characteristics, the trends, the behaviors that are perhaps telling us or signposting us what might be coming down the track if we don't intervene and do something about it. So let's not wait till we have lagging indicators and it's already happened and we're investigating them. Let's be proactive with those leading indicators, and let's try and be as proactive around that intervention as we can. So yeah, we're going to, observations to prevention. Then what does that escalation look like? Well, let's look at our observations to identify, as I said, those potential hazards before they become something more significant. A near miss potentially show where the system has nearly failed. So that system, of course, we mean that by the kind of broader control of work, safe system of work, what permits, whatever we're working in there. We've had a near failing, and just by luck, often it's not escalated into something worse. So again, let's use that as a proactive opportunity. Of course, an actual incident confirms there has been some kind of failure or shortcoming. So each stage there that we're looking at, observations, near misses, and incidents, they all create an opportunity for learning. Unfortunately, an incident, something bad has already happened, right? And so we have to try and learn from the actual outcome in that as well. But the goal here, the objective, I'm sure we can all agree with, is to try and use this sort of continuous cycle of feedback and improvement, and how we feed that information back down the line, and how we use that to actually implement true fixes and changes is really how we're going to become, I suppose, a true learning organization, and try and prevent that harm from ever escalating to that point. Of course, it's easy to say, harder to do it, but we've got to start somewhere. So, in summary, make it simple. Okay, keep it simple. Be supportive. Be responsive to these reports when they come in as well. Think about your culture. Culture matters more than counting. So, okay, so I've spoken about culture today, and transparency and accountability, and we've spoken a little bit about the numbers game, and I suppose some of the kind of pros and cons around with that. If you have the right reporting culture, the numbers shouldn't matter. Okay, you shouldn't need to rely upon the numbers to drive good quality reports. Early signs, as I said, observations, near misses are critical early warning signs, particularly those observations. So let's make sure and be across those. And again, management and leadership set the tone. Trust, transparency, feedback, continuous communication on the whole cycle. These are really, really important things that can undermine the whole reporting structure. So even if you've got really good, effective, simple reporting structures, even if to a point your culture's there, you're looking at the early signs. If leadership and management let that down and undermine it, then good luck getting that back on track. And that, folks, is us. I think I've covered quite a lot in that sort of 45 minutes or so, 50 minutes. I hope you found some of it useful. Some of it might be very, very routine stuff for a lot of you as industry professionals, and you're already doing it well. Fantastic. Hopefully for some of us, there were some useful takeaways there, and some really strong food for thought. That's my contact information there. I've just put my email on there, craig.smith@cometanalysis.com. If you want to chat more, if you want to reach out, if you want to know more about what we can do to help you here at Comet, then of course feel free to do that, and we can have a no obligation chat at any point in time. But I think that will do for today, folks. As I've said, I appreciate you joining. I appreciate you listening into that. I hope you found some of it at least useful. And have a really good and have a really safe rest of your day.